you're in the process of writing a new book about religion called Christianity versus the West. So why religion?
Well, I mean, one thing I should say is it was really the first philosophic issue that I got interested in. I was confirmed as a Methodist when I was 13. And like a month later, I said, I should probably think about which religion is true, like not just accept the one that I grew up with. And once I encountered the viewpoint of atheism and the idea of you should only accept ideas on the basis of reason, and once I was convinced there was no reason to believe that a God exists, I said, okay, I'm an atheist. And it was as quick as that. So religion was the way I got interested in philosophy. I eventually became less interested because religion is just what I think is a false philosophy, and I was interested in what's true. But when I reflect on what are the biggest threats to my values today, to reason, to freedom, to people living a Benjamin Franklin way of life, I think religion is the fundamental enemy, both in a kind of explicitly religious form, that is actual religious people advocating that we become more religious, that we inform our politics through religion, but also by secular people. I think you can't understand, what's often called like the woke left, the egalitarian left, unless you see it as its secularized religion. It's the source of all of the bad ideas in our culture. Now, to say it's the source is not to say that it's the only source. I think you can look at it from different perspectives. You can talk about really we're the result of a culture that accepts the ideas of Plato, but we've accepted them as they were communicated through Christianity. Christianity absorbed the Platonic outlook on life where this world's not that important, it's only semi-real, and what we should be serving are otherworldly ideals. That is a Platonic idea, but the reason that those ideas have stuck is it came to us through Christianity. Or Ayn Rand thought that the most evil and influential philosopher in the modern world was Immanuel Kant. But Kant just took Christian ideas and provided them with a secular kind of framing.
Aren't you thinking of religion as everything that is kind of mystical, epistemologically, everything that is not this worldly? Is that the code name for religion, or are you talking about the cultural movement that Christianity is?
I'm talking about the basic ideals of Christianity. If you take what are the essential doctrines, the most essential doctrines, there's some debate, but most Christians will put it as it's the creation, the fall, and mankind being saved through Jesus Christ. What do those ideas mean? Well, the creation is that there's a higher world which produced this lower world. And then human beings were brought into this world and committed the original sin of disobedience against God, driven by pride, self-love, that basically meant that we have to suffer in this world and hope for reward in the next. And how are we going to get that reward? By subordinating the values of this world, wealth, pride, pleasure, to the values of the next world, faith, sacrifice, obedience to God's plan. And the core orientation then is otherworldly, that it's a demotion of this world, it's a demotion of our means of knowing this world, subordination of reason to faith, and it's the subordination of the values of this world, the giving up the pursuit of earthly happiness for the alleged sake of otherworldly happiness. Those ideas, I think, are what are shaping our world and moving it in a really bad direction.
So a lot of people, think about America as an evolution of Christianity, right? Coming out of Christianity. The founding fathers and so many before them were Christian thinkers. And I remember going to my daughter's campus, which is highly religious, and for them, Enlightenment and Christianity are one. So how do you think about the relationship between Enlightenment and what brought America to be versus Christianity? What is that relationship there?
That's the big story that we tell in the book. But the core thing that you have to realize is that what was happening in the West, Christianity basically had 500 years where what I call earthly ideals, the ideals of reason and earthly happiness that was really epitomized by Aristotle's philosophy and the kind of culture of ancient Greece, or at least ancient Athens. That vanished, and all you had was otherworldly ideals dominate for 500 years. And we called those 500 years the Dark Ages. At the same time, in the Islamic world, they were imbibing Greek philosophy and had their golden age. So there you had earthly idealism and no Christianity, and it was a thriving situation. Dark Ages, you have Christianity, no earthly idealism. And then around the 1100s, the Christian West started rediscovering the ancients and above all Aristotle.
Through Aquinas.
Well, no, he was one of many thinkers who were bringing back Aristotle who were excited by the ideas of Aristotle. But there were a number of these thinkers, and what you had was a rebirth that kind of came to fruition most notably during the Renaissance, where people were still religious, but they weren't focused on religion. They weren't focused on the next world. It was kind of taken for granted, and they wanted to revive learning. They wanted to revive the arts. And then it really climaxes during the Enlightenment. And during the Enlightenment, it's not that people became anti-religious, though some did, but religion had to bend the knee to reason. That is, reason finally set the terms. And so the way that our colleague Onkar Ghate puts it is that it was during the Enlightenment that religion or Christianity was defanged. And just to give you one example of what that meant. So Aquinas, for example, is trying to reconcile reason and faith, and Aristotle and Augustine. You can think about it that way. And so he thought, well, there's the domain of faith and the domain of reason, and there's a place where they overlap, and they're both legitimate means to knowledge. They can never contradict each other, but really faith is the highest. Like, that's the most secure form of knowledge, is what we get through revelation. And Locke, who's really, I think, the epitome, the best thinker of the Enlightenment. Now, Locke's a Christian. I'll come back to that. But he's a pious believer in Christ. He thinks of himself as a Christian. And he says, no, everything has to come before the tribunal for reason. Even revelation, and he certainly believes in biblical revelation, has to prove itself to be revelation by reason. And so what the Enlightenment essentially is it's upholding reason. And yes, religion has its role to play, but that it has to justify itself before reason.
So what is your evaluation of where we are right now historically? I mean, you see kind of the false dichotomy of people, going extreme left and woke and crazy, and then the response to that is people going back to Christianity and the kind of mystic right, and there's a big void in the middle, and people are completely confused about those. Where do you think historically we are? Is there an opportunity, like a void in the middle of a vacuum for ideas? And how does that relate to objectivism as a movement?
So I think what we're in the grips of is a battle between two nihilistic groups. Groups is probably too strong because it's not exactly like two organized regimes, but you essentially have the secular nihilists who hate the Enlightenment and everything it stands for because they think it stands for exploitation, and that's kind of the woke egalitarians. But then you have the Christian nihilists who are enemies of the Enlightenment because it's overthrowing faith and tradition. So people are being forced to choose between two nihilistic groups, and those groups play off of each other. And so, for instance, the more that people see, one side attacking science, they flee into the hands of the left, right? Well, at least these people aren't anti-science. And the more that the left is attacking the founding fathers in America, the more that people who value America flee into the arms of the right. And so better people are latching themselves onto nihilists mostly because they see the problems in the other side. And so to the extent that there's an opportunity, it's that most people aren't nihilists. They're embracing nihilism because it seems the only alternative to whatever is the most obviously nihilistic force from their perspective in the culture. And so what you want to provide is a positive alternative that avoids the evils of both sides and has something really better to offer. But the problem is that, or let's call it the challenge. The challenge is that it takes a lot of mental work and courage to look outside the mainstream and question the mainstream. Like, what we're asking people to do is question religion, question the morality you've been brought up with, question the political, system that people have been taking for granted. Like, that's a lot to expect of people. It's possible. We've seen cultures radically improve. The Enlightenment came essentially over the course of a few centuries. The Renaissance and the Enlightenment came out of the Dark Ages. Again, it took centuries, but things can improve.